Hello and welcome to everybody to The View from the Top. We are live and we've got an amazing show lined up for you, and indeed what an amazing week that there is ahead of us. Politically and otherwise, everything is happening at the moment. It's an exciting week and we've got exciting guests. And Michelle, it's great to see you on the show again today. And where are you?
Hey there, Brian. How are you today?
I'm good. And whereabouts are you, Michelle?
I am in New Jersey, but I am at my quote-unquote beach house today.
Nice.
Change the scenery.
And is it beach weather?
Not at all.
Okay. So anyway, as I said, we've got a great show lined up. And what I'd like you all to do, everybody out there, and I see people are coming in already, so it's great to see that, is please join in the conversation, write in the comments box. I see people are coming in from all over the place. And a big ask for everybody out there, this is a bit cheeky of me, but if you're watching this, can you also just hit the share button and share that now live? Just share the fact that you are watching this. The reason it's particularly important to do that this week is that the clocks have moved in Europe, but haven't moved in the United States or in India. And therefore, for everybody in the United States or India, then we're actually going out an hour later than normal. And not everybody actually fully understood that because it's all quite confusing, different clocks moving different places. So if you could share, we'd really appreciate that. So hopefully more people will know that we're there. But I'm seeing people coming in from all over the place. So that's great. I can see I've got people from Pennsylvania, from Minneapolis, from London, from Philly, from York, from Chicago, from Boston, from Houston, from Phoenix, from Suffolk. So, people are coming from all over, which is great. It's great to see you all here. Now, I've got some really exciting news that I want to share, which is we've had a long conversation with our friends at ERC, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that ERC have now pre-authorized us for GMS credits. So this is really, really big news. Now, I don't know how many of you, do have the GMS qualification. I think you do, don't you, Michelle? You're GMS.
I don't, Brian.
You don't. Oh, well, here's your opportunity. So, we must get you to get it. But we are now pre-authorized for GMS credits. And the way it will work is that we've got a code that we will share, and we're going to share it towards the end of the show. But all you need to do is use that credit, that code that we give you, and then you put it into the ERC system, and then you're pre-authorized for one credit for each show that you watch. Now note it's a different code for each show, so you can't just use the same one each time, but we think that's really exciting.
We'll reveal that code at the end, so don't drop off too early.
You've got to stay. You've got to stay. Now we've got a great show. Do you want to tell us about the show and what we've got coming up?
Sure. Well, we've got Susan Benevides, CEO of Plus Relocation today. And I can just tell you, well, the conversation we've had in the green room, it will definitely be a great show, lots to dig into. Next week, we've got Berna Anderson coming on she's the Director of Mobility at Becton Dickinson. And if those of you that don't know Becton Dickinson, they are a medical device company, but they are really on the front lines of COVID testing. So Berna can tell us a little bit about that. She's got a core flex policy, which we're going to talk about, pros and cons. We can get into remote working and what exactly BD is doing today to address it. And we'll talk about reporting and really what that means to be more strategic. So good stuff for next week.
Okay, that's going to be a fascinating one. And that reverts back to our normal time. So it's 4 p.m. in the UK like normal, and 11 a.m. Eastern like it normally is. So because obviously clocks are moving, so it reverts back to our normal time. And then the following day, so next Thursday, we've got a really big, exciting edition of Benivo Bites. That's our technology program that we run every other Thursday. And that's announcing a really exciting new collaboration. And that's between Benivo and Going There. and we're calling it Going Benivo. And it's really how you can put together both the high tech side and the high touch side of providing both white glove service and technology service. So that's going to be a pretty exciting session that we do recommend that you all listen into. And then later on the show today, Julia, of course, is with us, the one and only Julia Onslow-Cole from Fragomen, and she's going to be talking about US immigration, big presidential focus in everything that we're talking about today. But the other thing that I do want to talk about just before we bring all our guests on, of course, is the top 100. I think most people know about the top 100.
Brian, I'm so impressed with your technology skills.
I've got to tell you, I did that all myself. I'm so impressed with myself that I've obviously missed a whole new career as a video editor. But anyway, the top 100 list, I'm delighted to say that Air Inc. have partnered with us and now are helping to partner with us on the top 100. And we're hoping to announce other partners over the next couple of weeks. But if you haven't gone out there and nominated someone for the top 100, you've only got till next Saturday, till the 31st, to get your nominations in. It is so easy. You just go to top100.benivo.com, and this is what you'll see. This is a site, and you just simply put in the names of the people that you want to nominate. It's so easy. So I really would encourage everybody to. I've said vote now. It's not really a vote. It's nomination to nominate everybody now. But anyway, without further ado, let's bring on our guests. Let's bring on Julia. Where's Julia?
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really laughing at Rohini's comments saying she hasn't met many good dancers in her GM teams.
Well, when we get to the real world, maybe we'll all have a chance again one day.
Luckily, dancing isn't a qualification.
And let's bring on Sue. Where's Sue? Hey, Sue, how are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Okay, so it's great to have you here. Where are you, Sue, today?
I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Cool. And
it's cool and cold and snowy.
And it looks like you're in your office.
I am. Believe it or not, we started opening the office for volunteers only. And I decided to take advantage of it today because I thought it would be better that the dog doesn't bark at the Amazon delivery guy today.
I have to tell you, Susan, that we've been running this show in the pandemic now for about 7 months, I think, during the pandemic. And I think you're actually the first guest we've had on that hasn't been working from home, that's actually done it in the office. And I'm hoping that's green shoots.
I believe it is. It feels good to be here, and I miss everybody, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we always start, we're going to get into a conversation, in more detail in a moment, but we always try and start with a fun fact of the week. So let's just and today's fun fact is about US taxation. Now, who would have thought you could have a fun fact about US taxation? But I'm going to go for it. And this is today's fun fact, which is that I think most people know that the US is pretty unique. Actually, I'll just stop there. Most people know the US is pretty unique in that it taxes its citizens on citizenship, not on residency. But I wanted to give a bit of background to that people might not know. The first thing is that dates back apparently to the Civil War, and it started in 1864. And the aim was there was a whole bunch of Americans who were quite wealthy, who were sitting out the war in the salons of Paris and London and weren't paying tax because they were not in the country. And that became a big political issue in the US, and legislation was introduced in 1864 to tax the citizens. That was later repealed, but then brought back in again. At one point, they tried to rule it unconstitutional, but that failed. I think it was in 1924. But from time to time, the US government does look at it and look at this whole question. The last time it was looked at was in 1995, when US Congress took a look at it and realized there were only 3 countries in the world that taxed their citizens based on citizenship and not based on residency. And those 3 countries were the United States, the Philippines, and Eritrea. The following year, the Philippines changed its legislation, so they moved on to a residency-based tax. So since then, it's only been the United States and Eritrea that tax their citizens based on citizenship. But even then, and I can't believe this, but I'm now going to get into the Eritrean tax system, okay, is unlike the United States that taxes its citizens fully on their citizenship. In Eritrea, there's a special 2% tax. That's it. You pay 2% if you are a citizen. And it is enforced under Eritrean law. And the way it's enforced is that if you don't pay the tax, then your relatives back in Eritrea are harassed, beaten, and possibly imprisoned. That's their enforcement mechanism. Canada didn't like this approach that the Eritrean was doing, and a court in Canada ruled it was unconstitutional to tax a dual national on 2 sets of taxation based on citizenship. That hasn't been taken any further as regards other countries that might want to tax on citizenship. Anyway, that's our fun fact of the day. And the fun fact is the only other country that taxes in the world based on citizenship, not residency, is Eritrea. So there we go. Fun fact of the week. At this point, we're going to say goodbye to you, Susan, for a short while. And we're going to have our regular update with Julia on immigration. So we'll see you in a bit, Susan.
Bye.
And I'm going to say goodbye to Michelle as well for the moment. So it's just us, and here we go. So, Julia,
yes,
you've got the microphone, and I think the focus is all going to be on the United States this week.
Yes,
and
definitely.
What a week.
Yes. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to Bo Cooper. He's the head of our government consulting practice in Washington. He's a very, very busy man at the moment, and I do work very closely with him, but he was very kindly talked to me quite a lot over the last couple of days. And so, as we all know, we are less than a week away from the US presidential election. And at the moment, Joe Biden has a comfortable polling lead. But everyone's very mindful about what happened 4 years ago when the polls were predicting a Hillary Clinton win. And also, there is a prevailing view that the outcome of the election is not going to be known next Tuesday evening, the 3rd of November, if the vote is quite close, because there's extremely likely to be a number of court actions. And I thought for those viewers that listening in who are not from the US, I could just explain a little bit more about the potential court actions, because I think from a non-US perspective, it seems odd that there would be court actions. But as an example, on Monday evening, the US Supreme Court sided with the Republicans in a 5-3 ruling to prevent Wisconsin from counting mail-in ballots, which we outside the US would call postal ballots, that are received after election date. And the lower court had ordered that as long as the postal votes were received up to 6 days after the 3rd of November, then they could be counted, provided they were postmarked as being sent before the close of the election day. But the ruling that came out on Monday was quite a victory for Republicans. And the ruling came moments before the Republican-controlled Senate voted to confirm Amy Coney Barrett to the US Supreme Court. And as everyone knows, her appointment locks in a conservative majority in the US highest court. Now, in Wisconsin, the Democrats were arguing that because of all of the challenges of COVID, it's really necessary to extend this period in which ballots could be counted. And Wisconsin is a swing state, so it's very important from the election perspective, and it's a hotspot for COVID. And the Supreme Court actually allowed a similar extension to go into effect for Wisconsin in the April elections. And that decision led to nearly 80,000 additional votes being counted. Now, President Trump actually carried the state in 2016 by just under 23,000 votes. So you can see how absolutely critical these state rulings are to the election. And you can see that if the vote is close, why there's likely to be a lot of court action.
And is this going to be decided on a state-by-state basis,
yes.
or is it going to be federal?
Yes, no, they're all state by state. So another really interesting fact is that voters in battleground states are driving record early turnout. So a week before election day, when I looked yesterday, there were more than 64 million Americans have already voted. So half of them are in a dozen or so competitive states that will ultimately decide who wins the Electoral College. And with more than a week to go, or with less than a week to go, early voters in these battlegrounds account for more than half of those states' total votes in 2016. And nationally, voters have already cast about 46% of the total vote counted in 2016.
Yeah,
so
I used to be told that I think it was in Chicago that they said to me, the line used to be, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes that counts. And I think never truer than this year, maybe.
Yeah. So from an immigration perspective, we have, view from the top, followed really closely all the kind of US landmark decisions. And you'll all be really familiar if you've managed to watch the whole program from all the time we've been on, but you'll really remember that kind of landmark week where we had the April the 20th presidential tweet, followed closely by the first proclamation, and that turned out to have limited effect on business because it applied most to family-based applications and applications at US consulates. Then you'll remember there was the second proclamation, June the 22nd, and that focused on non-immigrant entry bans, and that was H's and L's, and it is in effect until December the 31st. And that was mostly focused on people outside the UK. And then more recently, we've talked about the executive order concerning federal contracts. And also, we've also talked about the agreement that the Department of Homeland Security could provide information to the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor could use that information to investigate H-1B employees. Now, all of that we've covered as it was happening, but since then, there have been two further very significant restrictions on H-1Bs and other critical work visa programs. The first one of those is that the Department of Homeland Security, effective from December, have introduced strict new eligibility criteria for H-1B classification. So just one example of that is that they will require evidence showing that a specific degree is necessary for a certain role, which is at major odds with the way dynamic hiring practices of today's economies are made. So in which a mathematics degree might be a perfect academic preparation for, say, artificial intelligence, but it might not be a strict requirement under DOL guidelines. So these new requirements eliminate the hiring flexibility that we know is really essential to latch needed skills with essential emerging fields. And this is just one example. So for multiple reasons, it's going to be much harder to get H-1B status. And secondly, the Department of Labour have effectively, immediately on publication earlier this month, unlike the DHS rule, without the opportunity for advanced public comment, ratcheted upwards the salary requirements to be paid to H-1Bs and permanent residents. And we're seeing over a 50% increase in salaries in some cases. And this level of increase is disconnected from the market wages that the rules are meant to protect. So as all of you know, there are a number of recent federal lawsuits which are challenging the prevailing wage regulations, and others challenging the DHS regulation on H-1Bs. And the lawsuits say that the federal agencies have not followed proper administrative procedures when they fast-track the rules without giving any advance notice or the opportunity for public feedback. And the plaintiffs are requesting a preliminary injunctive relief to pause enforcement of the rules during litigation. Now, if President Trump wins the election, all the indications are that his team will defend and pursue these policy initiatives. If Joe Biden wins, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, Absolutely. We can't assume that they will all go away. If you look very carefully at all of his statements on immigration, his focus is on dreamers, on border control and asylum. And of course, it's true that massive moves have been made in this area. But just from our business perspective, that obviously is not Joe Biden's focus. But the one thing that is likely is that if the Democrats do win the election, they may not fight very hard on this litigation. And they may, for example, delay the litigation, and, that might be a sort of more positive outcome. So in summary, I guess we'll know. Which,
in fact, came in from Pat, who'll be with Pat Jurgens, who'll be with us next week. He said, how quickly can Biden reverse these restrictive immigration rules? That's assuming that he wants to, but how quickly can he reverse them? Will it be done by executive orders, or will legislation be needed?
Well, thank you, Pat, for that very difficult question. I will be thinking up a very difficult test question to ask you next week. Well, I think first of all, obviously, the things that have not come into effect, that's the easiest ones to get rid of quickly. So things that are supposed to be coming in, for example, in December, then, that will be much easier to deal with. But once, but if they're actually in, then, it is going to take, proper process to remove them. And obviously the difficulty is that the agenda is so full of things on immigration. If you look at the whole situation and the terrible things that, need addressing on non-business side. So it is very tricky.
So thank you so much, Julia. So
yeah, Sarah Videtz just said, U.S. immigration attorney here, practicing immigration law is a roller coaster these days. Yeah, so I think that's a very good comment, Sarah.
Okay, thank you so much, Julia. Thank you once again, and we will see you again next week when we'll talk about
the UK.
We'll talk about the UK, and we'll probably have a little bit of a post-mortem in terms of what's been happening with the election. But let's now bring on board our special guest. welcome to the show.
Hello. Happy to be back.
Good to see you again. And so how are you doing? You were saying earlier that you're in the office. So, what's it like? How many people are in the office? Is it quiet? What's it all like there? I've not been into an office for months.
Maybe 2 people here. Again, it's on a voluntary basis. So, it's weird. I mean, I'll be honest with you, you walk around and, you're paying rent in this very empty building. The whole building is quite empty.
So you've got a few floors in the building, and then it's
Correct.
a big building.
Yeah. Big complex.
Right. And how many stories is the building? Is it a big sky? I'm trying to picture it in my mind here.
About 20. So it's 20 floors. Yeah. And we have 2 of them. So
the whole building is empty, and that in turn means presumably all those people supplying the building, the coffee shops and the bagel stands and what have you, they're all struggling.
You have your own water and your own coffee for sure. We have no access to really anything in here.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about Plus. I mean, Plus started, as I recall from earlier discussions, in 1968.
Yeah. So 52 years.
Yeah. So you've been going 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm second generation, and it's been, I've seen a lot in those. Well, I haven't been around. I don't remember the first years, but not that old. But it's been interesting. I celebrated 30 years with the company on June 1st.
Now, you started as a receptionist, though, I believe.
I did. I didn't want to be in this business at all. I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, believe it or not. And my parents called and said, we lost our receptionist, get up here. And so that's what you did. And then I worked literally every desk in the organization, doing whatever I could and watching it grow. And then 2006 became president. And I think it was 2012, well, maybe 2015 when I became CEO. I don't even remember. Isn't that terrible? But it's been a interesting ride, Brian.
Yeah. And as I sort of know about you, you've got quite a big sort of West Coast. I know you're in Minneapolis. You've got quite a big West Coast focus with your clients. You've got quite a big, number of big marquee name clients in the tech sector. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. In the early 2000s, we signed a lot of business out there, and we stayed present even after what they call the dot bomb. And we've been able to really see some wonderful startups, some companies that are like, Fortune 100 that I remember getting them, and they had a couple thousand employees and moved a handful of people. And now, it's a different story, and it's been a great ride. Having tech companies is really great in a lot of ways because you can learn so much from them about how to operate a business.
Yeah. I mean, I've got this theory that everything starts in the West and gradually moves east across the world. And actually it's a bit like the rainbow, that I expect somewhere you can actually find, a garage somewhere in Palo Alto or somewhere where everything starts. And
now they're saying they're moving and now they're saying they're going to move their headquarters, everywhere else. And that the Midwest might be the tech center hub from going forward.
Yeah. I do wonder whether we're seeing the end of places like New York and San Francisco and London, other high rent locations. So it's interesting, but we'll get on to that. Actually, that's something I do want to catch up with you on. But before I do, I mean, it's been a rubbish year. I mean, let's face it. 2020 is not the year that any of us imagined when we're sort of sitting or standing with our friends and clinking a glass and drink and singing Old Lang Syne or something, in whatever 31st of December 2019. None of us imagined what 2020 was going to be like, and even January, February were okay, and then the proverbial hit the fan in sort of March of this year. But you've been out there leading, a major player in our industry. What's it been like? How have you managed to lead through, what I'd rather euphemistically call difficult times?
Well, it's interesting because there's no playbook, right? And so, at first I kind of went to the playbook we used in 2009 during the recession, taking a look at, what's the landscape look like, what's happening with our clients, what resources do we need, what do we need to stop? So we kind of took that, right away, we ended up closing the offices, and that was really interesting. All had to go work remotely. We had to make some difficult decisions. Just like 2009, we had the executive take pay cuts first, just to see how things laid out. But, one of the things that I've learned is it's all about transparency. And so in the beginning, every week I would get in front of our entire staff in my home, talk to them and share with them what's the volume, what's our revenue, what are our expenses, what do we need to do, what are we thinking about. And so, I think when we had to do some things, people weren't necessarily surprised. I mean, we basically did what everybody else did. We had to do some furloughs and we had to do some pay cuts. But because we kept them so close to the data and the information, the employees saw it coming and we could talk to them. The other thing that I started early on was I would actually, I set up 15-minute check-ins with all of the employees because I wanted to know how they were doing and let them ask questions. And that was really helpful for me to get a sense of their emotional state, right? You can look at workload, but what it was their emotional state. And so we started with that. And then, on top of the pandemic, we're in the heart of where George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah, I was going to get into that. I mean, there you are, you're in Minneapolis and, you think about Minneapolis, you think of lots of things, I appreciate Mall of the Americas and all that sort of stuff, that also comes to mind. But these days you think of Minneapolis and you think Black Lives Matter and you think, everything that's been happening. So, and you've been there, and you're in downtown, aren't you? And you don't live that far away. So, just talk us through, what it's been like and what's been going on, and what the mood on the ground is.
At first it was just overwhelming. We were taking it all in and watching I wasn't that far. The helicopters flying over the house over where the riots were, and yet the peaceful protests and this balance of everything. But, as a leader, this was a challenging time. So for me, at first I didn't know, do I have a voice to share? Do I have anything to say? And then I ended up having really deep conversations with several of our employees of color who just said, Susan, where do you stand on this? We want to know, where do you stand? And, originally I sent out an email to the whole company about where we stood about George Floyd's murder and the social injustice. And I got asked, would you come public with that? Would you do that? And I said, do I have that voice, And they said, Susan, we'll help you with that voice. I said, what I don't want to do is just come out and put something on social media about Black Lives Matter and then do nothing about it. That's not sustainable. And I said, this can't be a marketing thing. We have to have something that we believe in, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And they said, what if you lose clients because you've come out to say this? And I said, well, then they probably shouldn't be with us anyway, because that's not who we are. And so, we decided in the middle of a pandemic with pay cuts to invest, thousands of dollars into the Minneapolis city to rebuild those companies. And so that was something we could do sustainable. But then we also started, and headed by a wonderful employee of ours, Michael Barner, started a Conversations for Change. And what we're doing is we're taking books, and I'll pay for all the books and get them in people's hands. But then they're reading the books and breaking into small groups, because we've got to start having conversations that are difficult. Have these conversations about stereotypes and biases and the things we don't understand. And so I'm so excited because this group just keeps growing and they're on to their next book. And so, I just, this is a time for us to change. If you look at things that are hard, it is creating change, which is wonderful, right? And I also am very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in Q1 of this year, 4% of the S&P 500 talked about DE&I. In Q2, it was 40%. People are saying we've got to address this, and mobility has a place at this table. How are you running your program from a DE&I perspective? Are you getting the voice of the customer? Are you giving people what they need? Are you helping people with disabilities and things like that? Or are you just saying, well, we'll give them cash and they can figure it out themselves? We need to change things. And I'm just so passionate about it. And I want to continue these conversations so that mobility leaders can make change within their organization and figure out how to measure those results for success.
I think this is so important. And just, I mean, a couple of comments that people put up here. Tracy put, I so appreciate that you asked yourself the deeper why, and that you fully believe about Black Lives Matter before speaking out. Making it personal with integrity is honorable. And I mean, that's a fascinating point. You know, you asked yourself that deeper why, you know, and what you really believed. And then another comment here from Dara. The Conversation for Change Committee has been transformative. I don't know if you want to say a bit more. I'm guessing Dara works with you.
Yes, she does.
So maybe you could just say a bit more about how that committee is working.
Yeah. So again, they're looking for opportunities to educate, to find different materials and resources and books so that we talk about things. So, understanding on Columbus Day, what are the different viewpoints of that? Why is it important to look at it from different perspectives? How do the Black people feel about that? We need to not be afraid of this anymore. And some of it is having to get really introspective to say, am I doing some of these things intentionally or probably unintentionally that could be conceived as not appropriate or racist even, asking yourself that. These are difficult questions, but unless we start to break down the barriers and recognize that we do have a problem, a systemic, racism issue, we're going to just come out of this and be the same. Maybe the pandemic has led us to be more thoughtful and say, you know what, change is now. There's always opportunities in difficult times. And so that's what we have to seize.
Yeah, I mean, let's take it for there's various levels of this. I mean, there's obviously the level within our own companies and what we're doing with D&I in our own companies. But also we're in a pretty unique situation is that we're also looking at our client companies. Mm-hmm. And I must admit, when I sort of look at assignees, they don't look as a group, assignees don't look maybe as diverse as perhaps they should do.
Right.
And I think there's something, I don't know whether that's self-selection going on or whether it's companies themselves are not dealing with it. But, you look at the percentage of people going on assignment who are female, who are Black, LGBTQ, all that sort of stuff. It's not necessarily actually feeding through. And it raises the interesting question about, is there anything we can do as an industry, not just about putting our own house in order, but actually feeding out to our clients what they should be doing to ensure that people going on assignment are also, being treated fairly and with diversity.
Yeah, I think that, I've often looked at what we're offering in even a policy or benefits, right? We've been offering the same 8 to 10 to 12 benefits for decades. Does that really just fit the stereotypical homeowner renter or family single? That's how we've put people in this box. And what we need to realize is we need to expand and you can still be in the constraints of financial, there is a balance of how much can we invest and what can we do, but we've got to get beyond just the traditional benefits that we're offering or the traditional way that we look at people. I remember talking to somebody once with an engineering firm and they said, well, I think we have to change our policies because not enough women are taking assignments, right? And I said, well, how many women are actually being offered a job? So you're looking at it at the end. By the time you get to the policy, where are you going back to the hiring leaders and say, tell me how many women you have offered to? And then that's where the truth comes out. We've got to get back to the data. I have been challenging people to say, if you had to look at your exceptions that you approved or denied from a DE&I perspective, how would you fare? Are you giving things to people just because they fit a certain profile? What about the single mom, who may be raising other children in her family? But we say, oh, they have to be, your children. They have to be your dependents. We've got to break down these barriers and start to talk to people and make it safe. Had a great conversation with a group of women and men the other day about, are we even making it safe enough for somebody from the LGBTQ to come forward and say, I need something different from you? Are we letting the person with a disability to come say, do you understand why this doesn't work for me? And then are we doing it with care, or are they fear of retaliation? It's so much more. It's a change of perspective and insight. And I think mobility leaders and corporations are really at the forefront of getting at the table to say, we need to do something here. Sorry, Brian, I get so passionate about this.
I think it's right. And I think actually we need to spend more time on this subject on other shows going forward. I think it is a huge area. I do want to move the conversation on, though, to a slightly different area, although related. And I know it's a big thing with you guys at Plus and many people, is this whole concept of the voice of the customer. And I know that you've issued a report, you did it a while ago, where you actually interviewed people, assignees who are moving, about their experience moving during the pandemic. And you produced a report which I think from memory is called Mobility Lessons from a Pandemic. And I know it's on your website. But can you just tell us a bit about that? What did you find? What were the lessons that came out from the customer's experience, the assignee's experience of moving during, lockdown or semi-lockdown or work from home, or, just the pandemic generally?
Well, I want a huge shout out to Chris Pardo, who took this on and went out and had great interviews. I mean, we did over 300 quantitative surveys, but we also did deep dive qualitative interviews to understand the why. And it was interesting because, I expected a lot of people to say, oh, I absolutely didn't want to go on assignment once this happened. That wasn't the case. I mean, the data was really interesting, what we learned. We had done some voice of the customer a few years ago, just to understand, what do employees want today that we're not giving them? Because I think that we're been stuck in this box about what we think employees want. And the reality is, even in a pandemic, the thing that's coming out so clear from employees, assignees, anybody who's moving, associates, is they want choice, they want control, and they want care. Our industry has been so focused on choice, but they want control and care. And in the middle of the pandemic, the care is even more important. Our counselors are spending so much time talking to employees who are on hold, but they want just someone to talk to. And we're seeing people say, I'd like to actually have 2 household goods because I'd like to move closer to my family for a while. Family has become really important. Like if you're in your bubble and you're, only can stay with groups of 6, you go to the ones who are nearest and dearest to you. But then they're saying, but I know my company's going to open the office next July, so I'd like another move. It's interesting, but they want that care. They're looking for the care from their employers because they want to know they're safe. They want to know that the supply chain we're working with is safe. And I mean, that the suppliers that have pivoted in this time to do things differently, to create sanitization services overnight and offer it for free. I mean, people are doing some wonderful things, and the employees are begging for us to give them more of this. I think the role of mobility has become more important than it ever has before, but it can't just be about, here's some cash and go on your way. That's not what our role is. Our role is to help them find experts in the industry that can help them do it safely. Okay, so it's all about the voice of the customer. But we were talking earlier about it being a bit of a bad year is probably the understatement of the year. I just want to bring Michelle back in because we've done a little bit of research around this. So let me just bring you there, Michelle. How are you doing?
I'm here. Great stuff. Great conversation.
It's been a blast, and it's been really important. But I know, you've been doing a bit of research in terms of when do people think that assignment volumes are going to return back to pre-pandemic levels. I just wonder if you can just talk us through that a bit and say how the research has been.
Yeah, I think it's been, we've talked about this in the past, and I'm not quite sure that views have changed all that much. So the question we asked this week was, when do you think assignment volumes will return to their pre-pandemic levels? Given the options of within 12 months, within 2 to 3 years, or never, those days are over. Susan, obviously we're curious what your thoughts are on the subject, and as well as our audience members, if you want to chime in, what your thoughts are. Again, the question being, when do you think assignment volumes will return to their pre-pandemic levels?
Yeah, so out in the audience, out in LinkedIn world, just please try and answer that question and say, when will they return back to pre-pandemic levels, i.e. 2019 levels? Do you think it's going to be another 12 months, another 2 to 3 years, or do you think actually the world has changed, those days are over, we're never going to get back to pre-pandemic levels? And I'm talking about volumes of moves.
Yeah, so for me, it probably depends where in the world, but I don't see 2021. I don't think that we're going to be there in 2021. So I'm more the 2 to 3 year, right? But I am not a believer that it's gone. People talk about, everybody just wants to work from home and we'll never have to go back in the office and mobility is going to go away. I totally disagree with that. One of the things I've learned during this time is employees task really well at home. I think they do really well, head down. I've got a lot to do. I'm going to get through. But, once companies start opening, now a lot of them are saying next summer, right? So maybe it will be, I think it's going to be cyclical. I think we're going to have times when it goes up and then it comes back down. It's not going to be this seasonal adjustment that we're so used to seeing, right? Because I think it's going to be dependent on data and is it safe? But my point about the virtual, one thing that is missing with people not being together is collaboration and innovation. And that doesn't happen over a Zoom call. I can't be listening to someone say, oh my gosh, you're on mute. It drives me crazy. My brain doesn't work that way. I need energy around me. And so for me, I know companies, they're buying up real estate all over the place. There's intention to get everybody back to the office, and it might look differently. Perhaps it's not that 5 days a week, it's come and go, but allowing people to work that works for them. I think we're going to have a lot more flexibility. But do I think mobility is going to happen? Absolutely. There are industries that are arising out of this pandemic that don't have the talent they need. And they're going to be moving them to new locations. They want them there to collaborate together. So I don't want to go to this, it's over. Do I think it's going to shift? Yes. Do I think it's going to change? Yes. And I see this is the time that you really have to innovate in the midst of a pandemic. It's the opportunity to innovate. It's going to look different, but we will still be strong mobility community.
Powerful words. Michelle, do you just want to talk through the findings that we got from the audience?
Yeah. So 23% of our respondents think in the next 12 months. 31% said those days are over. 46% said in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, I think that's pretty much where you were coming out, Susan. In other words, it's not going to happen soon. 21's not going to be a good year either. But 22, 23, I think is going to start coming back. And 31% were saying. Only 31. Actually, I think it's quite a high number. 31% are saying those days are over, and I can see the argument there. I can see the argument saying that, they say, necessity is the mother of invention. That we've been through this. This has changed the way that we work. This is leading to the hollowing out of town centres. This is leading to whole different strategies, and maybe what we're going to see is a very systemic change. Going back to a conversation we were having earlier. Why would people be paying rent for their properties in San Francisco or New York or London when they could be moving their properties? Which brings us on to another subject, which I know that you've also done some work on at Plus, and I saw an article, I think, on your website, this whole concept of delocation. what's your view on that? I mean, this is the concept, and I think it came out of the West Coast, of saying we're not going to relocate people. We want to take people out of high rent areas and say, well, you don't have to be based in San Francisco. If you want to go and work in, somewhere much cheaper in, say, Nevada, or somewhere where maybe taxes are cheaper too, you can live out there. You still work as long as you can somehow get to an office, or maybe you don't even need to do that. But are you seeing a trend with delocation? Is that something that you see might be out there, the systemic change?
Yeah, I think that's just on the verge. And you're right. It's kind of coming out of the New York and the San Francisco, right? Where people were sitting there going, I'm not going to be locked down in here again. And companies are saying, do we really want to pay these high rents? We've got a great office in Tennessee. So let's encourage everybody to get there and give them some money to move there. And, for me, I see this as a huge potential opportunity for the mobility space, because these are, you're kind of asking them to move because you'd like to save on expenses, and you're giving them some money, but then they're not giving them any assistance. Why wouldn't you, if you're going to delocate somebody, they deserve to have access to the best suppliers and things like this, the support that somebody who's moving. I mean, I think it's an untapped market. I don't know that all the mobility people are in those conversations yet, but this is the opportunity to get them in there. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things. People talk all the time about, just get in your RV and work from anywhere. From a tax perspective, that just doesn't work. You've got to have entities. Now you're hearing the big companies, especially the tech ones, you can move anywhere. But by the way, we're going to change your compensation. And then you see some arguments to say, well, if I'm worth it, why would you change my compensation? Well, it was higher because you were there. There's going to be a lot of things that are in this that I think mobility needs to get that seat at the table and start to put some formality around it so that it doesn't get out of control. And then all of a sudden you have, back in the days when you had a bunch of stealth expats and you had no idea where they are. We don't need stealth employees all over the world because they delocated somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have seen some banks in some of the financial centers actually turning around and say, you can't work from anywhere. And indeed, if you do work from anywhere without our approval, you are personally liable for any taxes that arise. So, some of the banks are getting fairly worried about this. And obviously, they're more regulated than most industries, but they're getting worried. So I think we might see a bit of friction about exactly how much you can work from home and how much you're going to be allowed to work, actually not just from home, but work from anywhere. So I think that's a big issue.
Don't think that for the U.S., the states are going to be saying, wait, I want my taxes. You are working here. The states are facing a deficit because of the pandemic, because of everything going on. They're not going to say, I don't care if you don't pay taxes. You bet they do. So this is going to change.
Okay, here's a counter view I just want to put up this is from Fiona. While I totally agree with Susan that we do derive energy from others who we are with, I think we're moving into a more virtual work manner, whether you like it or not, and new soft skills will be required.
Thank you for sharing that, Fiona. I believe one of the things I have said since this pandemic is we've gotten better at being virtual. So we had those great skills about when we would be together, these skill sets, but I think our virtual skill sets in general we weren't flexing those muscles enough, right? So what did we learn during this? Now we've learned, okay, we know what it's like to work together, but now we know what it's like to work virtually, and we're better at it. Imagine when we bring all these things together, the power it is. Again, I think that there's a lot of people who are going to want to stay virtual. I think it's going to be much more flexible. I don't think you're going to necessarily have all these assigned cubes, because what if I say, hey, I'd like to come in for a couple hours to meet with my team, but then I'm going to go home and work for the rest of the day. People are working smarter than they've ever had before as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And because one of the problems with traditional ways of working, and I'm thinking here maybe especially of professional services, is that the way you worked is you got paid for the hours that you did. And so you take law firms or accounting firms or actuarial firms, they would be charging their time, and you got paid for the work that the effort you put in. You can't do that if you're working from home. you can't measure it in the same way. So I think increasingly what we're going to see is people being paid for the outputs that they achieve.
Yeah, it's going to be very much results. That's how it's changed. You have to have the metrics in place to measure results. Yeah. So, there's a lot of different ways to measure output, right? And I think companies have had to get laser focused on that, and that won't change.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's almost going back to the sort of almost pre-industrial revolution and the concept of piece rates. That you had to do something, you got paid for those pieces. And in fact, the interesting thing about if you go onto a piece rate basis is that if you haven't done it correctly, whatever that thing you had to do, you don't get paid until you've done it correctly. So you actually have to correct your own work, and you're only paid when the output is there. And I don't know how that would come into our industry or into other industries, but I do wonder whether what we're going to see is a move away from input based to output based. And let's face it, it used to be a bit of a joke that you'd go in the office, and maybe it's just me, but you go in the office and you'd leave your jacket on the back of the chair when you went out somewhere, so people thought you were still working, and you disappeared off to the gym or somewhere. Okay, maybe that's just me. But
it was just you, Brian.
But I've owned up to it now. It's too late. They can't fire me now. But in all seriousness, maybe we're going to see that change. So we haven't got long left, but just for almost like a couple of minutes, Susan, predictions for the future. What do you think? Where do you think we're going to be in? Let's go 5 years out. Forget 2 years. 5 years out.
Wow. Yeah, another crystal ball thing.
I know you have 2 minutes to answer. So
okay. And I'm grateful for my parents. 52 years of business. It's interesting because when we went into this pandemic, they've been pretty calm as cucumbers, shockingly. And they said, hey, we've been in business 52 years. We've seen a lot of things. Yeah, this looks different. But if there's one thing we've always learned is that in a difficult time is where there's opportunity. And so that is exactly what we've been looking at. And I think others have. So when you ask me, what is it going to look like? I think there are some companies who are right now pivoting and finding new ways to do our business differently, whether that be through technology or how we deal it up. Because I think we've got things where we're working with virtual interns, looking at ways to use technology. I think some people are afraid of it, but I mean, look at you at Benivo. You guys have done some wonderful, you're rolling out new things all the time in the middle of a pandemic, mind you. I think it's that kind of innovation that we're going to start seeing going forward. I think companies who are waiting for it to go back like it was are going to get left behind. It's too late to be catching up. You need to realize that in the next 5 years, it's not going to have, I'm talking about the seasonal adjustments. I think assignments are going to look differently than they have before. Perhaps you'll have more localization because you had a lot of people who were on assignment and then quickly wanted to get out from being there. Probably short-term assignments, ways to open up commuter policies, things like that. I see a lot of that going on. I do think we're going to change the way we work in the office and things like that, but I don't believe that mobility is going away. So I think we're just going to do it differently. And I think that there's going to be a more strategic emphasis on what mobility can bring to the table because of what we're learning from now and catapulting on that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I see Gusharan's made the point, the ability to adapt is what will get us through. And I think just taking that point, and I mean, you used the word pivot a couple of times in our conversation. And I think that probably is the word that is going to define which companies in our industry survive. And, sadly, I think there are going to be failures in our industry. But I think which companies survive is going to depend on their ability to pivot, because the world has changed. Yeah. None of us know exactly how it will change and to what extent it will revert. But there's no doubt that something has changed. And the nimble companies, the agile companies, the pivoting companies are the ones. We are actually now, sadly, coming towards the end of the hour. What I do need to do, a couple of things of housekeeping towards the end. So please don't go if you're in the audience. I should bring on Julia as well. But just to remind everybody, it's just down at the bottom there, is that if you want that GMC certification credit, then the code you need is 16340, 16340. So make sure you make a note of that. Obviously, it'll be there on the LinkedIn recording afterwards as well. 16340 you need. And also, I've got to remind everybody that voting for the top 100 list, nominations for the top 100 list, closes on the 31st. We're not extending the deadline. It's not like other award ceremonies where they extend. We're not extending. This is a hard deadline. So if you want to get out there and nominate, and you haven't nominated already, then please do so. If you have already nominated, remember you can nominate up to 10 people. So if you haven't done all 10, then get out there. And if you're a US citizen, I'll just leave the message, just get out there and vote too, because I know that's important for all American citizens. It's been a great show. It's been wonderful having you on the show, Susan. Thank you for your help with the research, Michelle. And Julia, thank you for the wonderful immigration updates. And you'll be back with us next week when we will be able to look post-election and see what's happening. So thank you to all our audience. As ever, it's been a blast. And thank you to Susan, to Michelle, and to Julia.
Thank you. This was
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I'm thinking up my difficult questions for Pat next week.
Indeed. Pat will be with us again next week.